And here we go. I am Dan Kingerski on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now platforms. I'm almost on time. I want some credit for that. It's going to be a little bit of a wild show. We've got a lot to pack in today because not only will we talk about Kyle Dubas, Mike Sullivan, we're also going to turn the page quite a bit and look ahead to some potential coaching candidates. Now, I've only dug so far into three names I'm going to toss out. I presume Francis Anzalone. You remember Francis. It's been a few months since we talked to him, but he's kind of our hockey insider-ish kind of guy. I mean, smartest guy that no one's heard of, at least on the national stage. And Francis is going to help us uncover a few more names as well. He spent last night digging in. I'm like, Francis, take the evening, man, relax. And he's like, no, I enjoy this. So he was calling some contacts. He was doing some homework, digging into it. I suspect he'll have a few names for Penguins candidates as well. Plus, of course, this is a live chat. I will share this as an audio podcast, but for those of you participating live, this is how this works. I talk, you talk, well, you type rather, and we go back and forth and we get there. And you wouldn't think this conversation goes very long, but we get a lot of information in to these live chats. So I want to say hola to, I see a couple comments coming in. Everybody who joined us last night as we kind of did the Mike Sullivan exclusive video. I think some people were disappointed I didn't take questions. I just wanted to focus on Sullivan last night. Check out that video on both the Facebook and the YouTube platforms. So just to recap, in case you were under the rock for the last 24 hours, comatose, or if you heard the news yesterday morning at 9:02 a.m. that the Penguins had fired Mike Sullivan and just got deliriously drunk, we're going to catch you up a little bit because Kyle Dubas' press conference yesterday, he was short on the word salads and I think heavy on the steak. I thought he was direct. I thought he was straight on Monday, and he answered the questions as well as he could have. It would have been unprofessional to say, well, Sullivan wouldn't do this, or Sullivan wanted that and I wanted this, so I win. That would have been untoward, would it not? So I think in a couple of instances, he said, I won't speak for Sully. You know, he can address those when he chooses to. It was amicable, according to Dubas. He began thinking about the decision to fire Mike Sullivan during the season, which took me back, or it took me aback, rather, because he was so strong in his defense of Sullivan. Remember January when he said, no, Mike Sullivan is safe. If we were to fire Mike Sullivan, we'd be looking for Mike Sullivan. So we've got Mike Sullivan. Remember that sort of, little turns of phrase back in January. But I suppose he saw the same things that everybody else saw. Now, for me, in my position as kind of a go-between you and them, the fire Mike Sullivan situation was never worth my time because he was assumed to be safe. I criticized Sullivan, although I know some of you did. People kind of hear what they want, and so some of you were really mad that I defended Sullivan on several issues, which I did, and I think rightfully so. But I also cracked him on a few others. But because I defended him, I think people got this incorrect notion that I was somehow advocating Sullivan to stay, which I certainly was not. I think Dubas made the right decision. It surprises me. I'm going to take these glasses off. The angle, the progressives were making the screen blurry because I had to either do this or that. Dubas made the right call because I'm going to call you to several examples, later in the season. You could feel Mike Sullivan being frustrated with the team. just straight up unhappy with him. The one that a couple of my colleagues called immediately to mind was late in the season. I think they got beat badly by, was it Washington or Chicago or whomever it was at home? And I don't know if I should use his name. I mean, he's a locally known reporter. Regardless, said, after the slow start, you kind of got back into the game there for a while. And Sullivan said, slow start, slow game. I was like, oh, okay. And you could kind of feel that Sullivan had a bit of a distaste for what the team had become. Okay, so that's kind of my setup and my tee up. I don't know how I'm going to see if where am I going to see Francis if he is ready to join. When he does, I suppose I will see him and I'll be able to add him to the stage because Francis Anzalone will be coming on in a few minutes. Let me get to a couple of quick comments. Michael wants to know how my day is going. Listen, man, I'm at work. I get to screw around, and this is work, believe it or not. But, yeah, it's kind of fun. I think we should go after Peter Laviolette. Michael. No, Michael. Just delete that comment. Just stop. Don't repeat that to anybody else. Laviolette is very much in the same mold as Mike Sullivan, an older, established coach. I would say Laviolette is probably far more set in his ways than Sullivan, and Laviolette has had a shelf life, a very short shelf life, or increasingly short at each of his stops. There's a rise of success, and there is a crash. And quite frankly, I think a lot of teams have solved his forecheck system. Jake Bacon, what's up, Dan? Do you think Rick Tocchet could be an option given his history with the team? I don't really think so. I mean, yes, given his history. But his history was with Jim Rutherford and Mike Sullivan. They're all gone now. So he would be coming back to coach the final couple of years of Sidney Crosby. I don't know that that's an enviable position. Also, Jake, think about this. Rick Tocchet is 61 years old. He hasn't won a Stanley Cup as a head coach. And quite frankly, his head coaching track record is a little bit spotty. He's done very good jobs, but then he's also had seasons like this past one or this one with Vancouver where it all sort of went sideways. And he hasn't had playoff success. I don't think a rebuild, I mean, I'm speaking for him, I suppose. He might prove me wrong. I don't think a rebuild is where Rick Tocchet would be best served. Making sure Francis isn't here yet. Nope. Brian, 2015. Hi, Dan. How long before the fan base hates the new coach? Here's, you joke and I joke and we laugh. I will tell you, there is still an unfortunate part of the Penguins fan base that lives in the blogosphere church. And they all sort of seem to group together. And when a lead blogger or two start, I don't like this, everybody seems to gravitate to that and get on this bandwagon of we have to hate. And then they start just picking and nothing can satisfy. I hope that doesn't happen to the new coach, but yeah, it's certainly a possibility, that's for sure. Let's go to Matthew. Oh, Matthew's talking to other people on the chat. All right, Matthew, I'll leave you to it. Big Joe says, hi, Dan. Disappointing Wilkes-Barre playoff series. Yeah, you can say that again. Did I see anything I liked? Come on, Big Joe, read what I wrote. I wrote like 5,000 words in 2 days. I wrote massive team analysis, player analysis from those 2 playoff games. Come on, Big Joe. You got to go to PittsburghHockeyNow.com. I do. I know that some of you don't realize I'm a full-time writer, and I do these just to communicate with you guys on the regular. So I'm not ivory towered. Yes, I saw quite a bit that I liked, but I'm going to make you read them. In fact, here, Big Joe, I am just for you going to pull up these articles and link to them, just so you don't have to, type in Pittsburgh Hockey Now. These were behind the paywall. Okay. And okay. Tell you what, if you haven't subscribed yet, Big Joe, I'd love it if you did so. Subscriptions keep us on the travel road. Subscriptions pay the bills, pay the electricity, and all of that. So use code DAN10, and that'll save you $10 off of a yearly as well. Plenty that I liked. Let's get to Brandon. I think I heard Francis pop in. Yep, I did. Okay. In fact, before we get to Brandon, let's bring in Francis here, who did his homework last night. And let's get rid of Brandon. There we go. We add Francis Anzalone, the man, the myth, the legend, the hockey brain that is behind the curtain. Francis, how are you?
Doing great, Dan. How are you today?
I have to close my YouTube windows. There we go. Okay, Francis. I think the name that you and I both maybe looked at yesterday, as both of us kind of independently began our investigation, was DJ Smith. Spent basically 5 years as coach of the Ottawa Senators. Not a sexy name. There's DJ getting huffy behind the bench. So that's my first name I'm going to toss out. I know Ottawa really liked him. I know he was the guy that brought them from, the dregs of the league back towards respectability before they had to hand it off to the next guy. So what do you think, Francis? Where's your mind going? I suppose David Carl is the obvious choice that everybody's like, oh, just assuming David Carl will throw down, palms to walk into Pittsburgh, but it's probably a little deeper than that. There's probably a few more candidates too.
Well, I have many thoughts on this. I have many candidates that
I would hope so.
I would like to throw at you and the audience here today as we just attempt to stimulate thinking. I thought it was neat of Kyle Dubas to somewhat commit to a timeline yesterday in his press conference when he addressed you in the media, because we don't see that very often. Obviously, round one for Kyle will be phone calls and virtual meetings. So that leads me to believe, Dan, anytime that's the first step, that it is going to be a rather wide net. I think DJ Smith will be one of the names on the list. I think David Carl will get a call. I personally do not believe that David Carl and this situation are a very good fit.
Okay.
David Carl is an outstanding coach. I actually came up with him in the USHL back in the day. He was an assistant coach in Green Bay, believe it or not, post John Cooper when I was in Cedar Rapids. He's done a phenomenal job at Denver. David Carl needs to be wicked selective about the opportunity that he chooses. And I do believe that to an extent he will have a choice here, because historically, Dan, coaches that come directly out of college hockey and go to the NHL are not a great fit. Jim Montgomery was an exception to that recently when he went from Denver to Dallas. And even there, one could make the case that he wasn't totally ready due to some other stuff. I think this is going to be a very, very large list. I think when all is said and done, Kyle Dubas is going to go a little bit outside the box. And I have some suggestions on outside the box names.
Ooh.
Just to get some feedback going here today. But yes, I do believe DJ Smith is going to be one of the names on the list and one of the individuals that Kyle Dubas at least talks to.
Well, I think you're correct about college coaches. I think of Dave Hackstall, who was hired by Ron Hextall
Great
in
name.
Philadelphia. Yeah, he had the attributes of a very good coach, but there were just some X's and O's things that were his undoing, and some things that I don't think he was prepared for in terms of dealing with 30, 35-year-old men who sometimes tell you where to go and how to get there.
Right.
Okay, so I haven't, this is completely beyond my knowledge base. Dubas specifically mentioned Europe as well in terms of looking for head coaches. And I could see him, given the dearth or the huge number of Finns in the organization, I could see him going to get a Finn, pulling a Craig Patrick, right? Trying to outsmart everybody with Ivan Halinka way back in the day. I could see Dubas doing something like that.
Yeah, I think he'll look to Europe. Obviously, one of the names that consistently comes out of Europe is Richard Gronberg, who has been to a couple different places in the last 3 to 5 years. I believe he's in Jokerit, formerly in the KHL, now back in the Finnish league, if I'm not mistaken.
Look at you with the name ready. That's awesome.
Yeah, Jukka Jalonen, who I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, who's been the Finnish national coach for a number of years, is one of the more popular names coming out of Europe these days. He's not a European, but Guy Boucher just did a phenomenal job turning Avangard Omsk around in the KHL. Him and Dave Barr when they came in at the Christmas break. Now they've since re-upped 2-year deals, and those deals are hard to get out of in the KHL. But I think it's going to be a very, very wide net. I have 3 names for you here today that, you live and breathe this. So I'm sure you've thought of 1, 2, or all 3 of these names, but there are 3 names that I have not read yet. And I believe there's high probability Dubas is going to talk to these 3. And one of them is my dark horse candidate, who I think will minimally be a finalist for the job.
Okay. I'm listening.
Okay. I really believe that what Kyle Dubas is going to do, and you and I texted about this yesterday, is he's going to look at the Spencer Carberry profile and work backwards, because that is the profile that a lot of general managers are after these days, and it fits Kyle Dubas almost to a T.
Yeah, but there is a Carberry around this year, is there? I mean, I have not really heard of a hot AHL coach that everybody wanted.
Okay, so here's some Carberry-like folks, and these are not necessarily the 3. Jeff Blashill is a Carberry-like person, and I'm going to tell you why. He coached college hockey, whereas Carberry coached Major Junior. He worked in the American League. He worked as a National Hockey League assistant. He was fired from his first NHL gig, which is not like Carberry, and he's gone to relearn his craft, if you will, under John Cooper, who's one of the best coaches to work under because he's got the stuff, as we all know, and he lets his assistant coaches coach.
Has Blashill spent enough time under Cooper yet? I mean, let's be honest. Blashill was holding back his team by the end.
I don't believe Jeff Blashill will be the next coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I believe that Jeff Blashill is on the list. And I believe that Jeff Blashill is someone similar to a Carberry in terms of the journey.
Okay.
Mitch Love would be a name. Former head coach of the Everett Silvertips, former defenseman, on Spencer Carberry's staff in Washington. Prior to that, was the head coach of the Calgary Wranglers in the AHL. Might he need a little bit more time before getting an opportunity like this? Perhaps, but he is a Carberry-like name. I think another name to watch out for.
Well, here, I'm going to put a picture of Mitch Love up there.
Yep, there's Mitch Love. He's looked the same since he played, if my memory serves me correctly.
Well, known as there for the both of them, I assume.
Known as a pretty good guy, very good at working with defensemen.
Yeah.
A name that I think Kyle will consider, given the connection to the Canadian Hockey League and the fact that He's been in Washington under Spencer Carberry, someone that I know Kyle Dubas really respects and maybe even trusts. I'm going to throw a name at you right now that I think everyone needs to keep in mind.
Okay.
And that's Drew Bannister. Drew Bannister was the head coach of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. He was hired by Kyle Raftis, who's the general manager of the Greyhounds, and Kyle Dubas and Kyle Raftis are very close. Drew Bannister left Sault Ste. Marie after doing an outstanding job to go coach the Blues minor league team in San Antonio. The Blues obviously elevated Drew Bannister to head coach. He started the year in St. Louis, was replaced by Jim Montgomery. And the biggest reason why Drew Bannister was replaced, and Doug Armstrong, the president of GM and GM of the Blues, said this, is because Jim Montgomery was available. They wanted Jim Montgomery. I would not be surprised, there he is, if Kyle Dubas has a conversation with Drew Bannister. Like, Dan, we can sit here and we can talk Joel Quenneville, Peter Laviolette. I mean, I even think there's a case to be made for Dan Bylsma 2.0 here. But I don't think he's going that direction. I think he's going to go more of this type of a direction.
Yeah, I was mentioning before you hopped on here that there is sometimes a tendency in the Penguins fan base where a couple of high priests will not like a move, and it becomes a contest then amongst a lot of people to see who can not like the move more.
Right.
If they bring back any of those names you just mentioned, Dan Bylsma, Peter Laviolette, I think I might join them on that journey, because yeah, those would be, I think, terrible fits. At least Laviolette's had some success. Bylsma hasn't had any success, Francis, boy, since 2011.
Yeah. I know this isn't the Dan Bylsma show, which used to be a feature on the Penguins website, if I'm not mistaken. But
I suppose that's where the thanks Dan comes from.
That's right. That is a puzzling one for me in Seattle. The criticism on Dan Bylsma was the team did not play with enough structure. Anyone who knows Dan Bylsma knows he has no problem putting structure in place. One of the criticisms on Dan Bylsma towards the end of his tenure here in Pitt was too much structure, a bit too stubborn, a bit too bullheaded at times. I think Dan Bylsma tried to take the reins off and let those players in Seattle play a bit. I think they have bigger issues in Seattle than the head coach. But he knows this core. At one point, he had a very close, tight relationship with this core. He's good at coaching young players. I'm just saying, Dan, I've seen stranger things happen.
Okay.
And I wonder if Kyle Dubas will put a call in. Again, I'm throwing names out that I think will be on that first list. And perhaps we can whittle it down here as we go. I think he'll talk to Jay Woodcroft.
That would make a little bit of sense.
Former head coach of the Edmonton Oilers. I absolutely think he'll talk to DJ Smith. There might be a conversation with Nate Lehman, the head coach of Providence.
I think that would be a fantastic name. Nate has waited his turn. The Penguins have taken several draft picks from Providence over the last several years. Casper Bjorkquist springs immediately to mind. I mean, he didn't work out, but they had that kind of relationship where the Penguins could pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Nate, what do you think of this kid?" And they selected him pretty high. So I actually kind of like that name. Maybe an older, more established guy, but maybe one who's ready to take that leap later in his career. A major league sort of movie brewing.
He knows hockey very well. He has terrific presence. He runs a pro-style program at Providence. I believe Nate has been selective over the years in what he has and hasn't had his eye on. Typically, when an NCAA Division I head coach's name gets brought up for an NHL opening, Nate Lehman is in that mix. There's no question that right now, David Carl is at the top of that list. The draw for David Carl with Pittsburgh would be, man, I get my first NHL head coaching position to be with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang. That could be a good fit for David Carl.
But do you want to be the coach of the end of the big three? That seems to me, and the only parallel I could draw as I kind of thought about that this morning was you're probably too young to remember the fight over the Tonight Show back in the mid-90s when Johnny Carson retired and they were going to give it to either Jay Leno or
Yep.
David Letterman. And there was actually a book about it that HBO turned into a movie. And Letterman is stewing because NBC's made him an awful offer. And his agent looks at him and says, now don't forget, you're not getting Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. You're getting Jay Leno's Tonight Show. And I would kind of feel like that would be David Carl. You're not getting the Pittsburgh Penguins. You're getting what's left of the Pittsburgh Penguins.
And David Carl, again, Dan, he needs to be very selective about the organization he chooses, the ownership group he chooses, and the general manager he chooses.
Do you think that's why he bailed on Chicago, that they're just not ready yet, that was too much herding cats, so to speak, that they're not fully formed in Chicago yet?
I think the Chicago Blackhawks, from what I gather from a lot of different avenues, are a bit of a hot mess.
That's kind of what I was politely indicating too.
I think the Chicago Blackhawks need a steady hand. Let's leave it at that. And if you want to talk Blackhawks, I have some ideas for them too, but I know that's not the topic here today.
Sullivan?
Well, listen, he's worked for the organization in the past. I don't think that's going to be where he lands. I mean, listen, I think, like, who would Sidney Crosby pick? He's got a great relationship with Rick Tocchet. But at the end of the day, I would say lower probability of that happening. Yeah. But I think we need to acknowledge the name. It's certainly a heck of a name. I'll throw a few more names at you that maybe folks are not talking about.
All right.
I think a name that will come up here for Kyle Dubas to consider potentially is Jeff Halpern, one of John Cooper's assistants in Tampa Bay, played for the Washington Capitals for many years, was considered for the Detroit Red Wings opening several years ago. He's been waiting his turn.
That's an interesting name.
It's a name to follow, as you have your ear to the ground for sure. And if it comes up, anyone joining us here today will have heard it before. Perhaps Alain Nasreddine, who formerly worked
about him. Yeah, he was the interim coach in Nashville. Obviously, a longtime Wilkes-Barre guy. Where he's still coaching right now. Was it Dallas?
He's in Dallas, and he's been working under Peter DeBoer, who's one of the best to learn from. And you know, when Kyle and Jason Spezza and his crew are sitting around batting names, and Alain Nasreddine comes up, someone in the room, if they have half a brain, is going to say, yeah, he's been working for the last 2 or 3 years with Pete DeBoer. That carries weight in National Hockey League circles. Peter DeBoer is very highly regarded. Now, listen, somebody in that Colorado-Dallas series is going to get really, really bad fate, because it's sad that one of those teams is going to get knocked out in the first round. And I think one of the things that we have to consider here is what if Peter DeBoer becomes available? I would say long shot, but something to consider nonetheless. Now it looks like you are off the screen, so it's either
I gave you free reign.
Look at that.
I can't get myself back.
I'm almost scared to be full screen by myself here. Or maybe you liked my you liked Nasreddine and the 1% chance DeBoer becomes available enough to put me on the big screen.
I'm not a. How do I hang on? Let me try to do this here.
One of the things I love about your operations is it's very authentic. What you see is what you get. It's all happening live here. You got locked out of a computer once when I was on one of these, or you couldn't log into it.
This is insane. I can't get you back on. How the hell do I? Because I tried to remove you. All right.
You can hear me though, huh?
I can put you on solo, but I lost the ability to have the
both of us
screen.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Wait.
I haven't even dropped my big name yet.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put you on full screen then. And here you go. Who's the big name?
Here's the name I want
You
Penguins
know what?
fans.
Here's a teaser, Francis. I'm going to throw a name at you.
Okay.
It'd be funny if we both have the same big name.
Okay.
I am going to let me share the screen here. Here's a guy that I think, Nolan Pratt in Colorado. His work with their defense over the last few years, and I think about how brutal the Penguins' defense has been.
Yep.
A guy who can help, who might be ready. He's a name I would talk to. And, of course, our former Avalanche beat writer, Evan Rawal, really liked him. Okay, that's the other name I'm going to contribute.
Yep.
Now, oh, yeah, we're back to dual screen.
There
I
we
have no
go.
idea how that happened. So,
Better ask your producer.
yeah, he's a moron.
I like the Nolan Pratt name. He's played for some really good coaches, John Tortorella in particular. He's been with Jared Bednar for a long time in a very, very strong culture in Colorado. The challenge with Nolan Pratt is fresh out of pro to the American Hockey League as an assistant, to the National Hockey League as an assistant, and he's never been a head coach. And there's nothing wrong with having never been a head coach, but typically what NHL GMs want to see is if a longtime assistant wants to be a head coach, will he go to the American League?
Yeah.
Even if it's for 2 years and hone his craft there. So if Kyle Dubas went with a Nolan Pratt, that would be the only element of risk that I can see on the surface, is he's just never been a head coach before. And is this a lot to throw a Pratt into? And that's something Kyle Dubas and his crew would have to vet.
Okay, so your big name is, drum roll, please.
I want Penguins fans to remember this name, because it's the name that no one's really talking about. It's the head coach of the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL, Chris Lazary. I want Penguins fans to remember this name, Lazary, and here's why. Lazary's come up in the Ontario Hockey League, similar circles as Kyle Dubas, coached the Saginaw Spirit, who everyone ruled out to a Memorial Cup last year. If I'm not mistaken, you were there, Dan.
I very much was.
Chris Lazary is known as open-minded, collaborative, cutting edge, but his teams play a very hard, connected, pro-style game that works and wins. And he's got the reputation as being a very, very good guy.
He's also got a hell of a beard.
He does. He's always had it as long as I've followed his career. He would be a bit of a risk, but I don't think Kyle Dubas is going conventional with this one. And we haven't yet.
I like the Saginaw Spirit. They weren't supposed to be as competitive as they were at the Memorial Cup last year. They were in it because they were the host, not because they earned their way in. And damn, they were good. I mean, they outplayed Moose Jaw at that point. Had Braden Yeager, David Savoy, Denton Matejchuk, and there was another one who was the high-scoring winger that I'm forgetting. Oh, darn it. Anyway, yeah. They shut down Moose Jaw.
This is a name we need to keep in mind because if I'm not mistaken, Chris Lazary also worked under Spencer Carberry in Saginaw. I just think this is a Dubas-like name. And my sense is that Chris Lazary's had opportunities to pursue the American League already. I think he might be waiting for something like this. And he has it pretty good in Saginaw. Good ownership, solid organization, on stable ground, a bit of a culture, good relationship with the general manager, Dave Drinkel. It's a name I want Penguins fans to remember because you may hear about him as the next 30 to 45 days pass.
All right. So of the conversation, now I know you have got a meeting at 2:00, and I don't want to run you up.
I have time, but you can boot me whenever.
No. I never boot you until it's absolutely, past time.
Mm-hmm.
As we're talking these names, obviously I kind of liked DJ Smith, but I'm coming back to Nate Lehman as a guy that I really like to see get a long look at this process, because there is something, Francis, that tells me there has been a great generational shift in players over the last, let's call it 2 or 3 years. Those elder millennials and the millennials are now giving way to the or to the Z and the alphas even. And there's a big difference in these kids. And I'm not doing the old man shake my fist at the clouds, because actually what I'm seeing is almost an adherence to work ethic and like having a pure body. Like, these guys aren't going out drinking like they used to, and these guys are learning how to use their edges at a much earlier age, and they're in hockey camp at 5 years old now, or maybe some of the elder millennials actually, had to go play on the pond. But there's also just maybe a little bit of a distrust from these kids who are 20 towards even a Mike Sullivan, who was a hardcore Gen Xer who listens to Frank Sinatra. And I think there would have been a schism between, an older guy like that and these kids coming up. Whereas Nate Lehman, even if he's older, spends all day with these guys. I'm sure they've kind of made him a younger, older coach.
Yeah, I would say 2 things that we need to keep in mind, and I know you know this. I'm just bringing it to light. Number one is...
That's the way you disagree with me while being very polite. I appreciate that.
Well, I live in a world where I try to be polite and respectful most of the time, because if I was my true self, it could get me in trouble. So I'm trained.
Welcome to my world every day.
I hear you. Okay, 2 points. We just need to keep in mind that the Penguins still have to secure a coach that can earn the trust of Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Raquel, Rust, while also being someone who can lead the younger players coming up. Now, the other piece of this is the young players coming up there isn't a herd of them coming up. And they're going to need to be coached up and elevated a bit too.
Yeah.
The cupboards aren't that stocked. You live it every day monitoring this. I don't. So, listen, Dan, this is what makes a coach, in my opinion. I think a good coach maximizes the collective. I think a really good coach recognizes that the key to maximizing the collective is to build relationships with each and every individual and get the most out of them. And I think a really, really good coach does the first 2 things and creates an environment where the players love it more when they leave than when they arrived. That third piece is going to be really key here. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins need a high energy coach that the young players are drawn to and the older players feel 28 again. I think that could do a lot for the Pittsburgh Penguins if even if the coach gets a little eccentric at times or over the top, the coach creates an environment where it's fun for Malkin, it's fun for Crosby, because that's what Carberry's done in Washington.
Do you know who you're describing?
Who am I describing?
Bob Johnson.
Well, Badger Bob was at a different chronological point. Badger Bob, God rest his soul, was another level of positive and forward-looking. But yes, Badger Bob had a vibe about him every day where you were excited to be around him and you were excited to step on the ice. And if you watch Spencer Carberry's post-game addresses to the team, which are viral on the internet, he has done a fantastic job of being his youthful, exuberant self, but having the veteran guys like it and be gravitated towards it. I think the Penguins need that very same thing here. Whether the coach is 32 or 62, I think they need that. And I would say the likelihood of the coach being under 50 is probably greater than over 50.
That was where I was looking as well, because Pratt fits there. DJ Smith is right about there. It's kind of funny. I suppose it speaks to the treadmill that coaches get on, is keep getting recycled, because so many of the names that I first thought of and so many of the assistant coaches who used to be head coaches and so on and so forth, as I did my homework last night, I realized, oh, geez, they're 55, 57. Rick Tocchet, 61, which blew me away, by the way. I was like, my God, where does time go? But you're right. I think Dubas, especially still being on the shallow side of 40, is going to look for a guy more in line. Yeah, that 45 to 48 years old.
That's where I think the age of the next Penguins head coach is going to come in. Not so much, Dan, as it relates to the players, but as it relates to the GM. I think the GM, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm just calling what I think I see. I think the GM is going to go with someone plus 10 to 12 years or less than him. That makes
it makes
a lot of us are in alignment on that, I think.
I think even as you have the interviews and the conversations, there is a certain language or a certain connection or a familiarity, even if you've never met before, of people within your age bracket. Whereas, like, I'm about to age out of the Nielsen ratings. I'm going to leave that 18 to 49 demographic in a year. I'm like, no, my opinion on the terrible movies that they've been putting out are no longer relevant. But I digress. So, yeah, I think you still have 15 years left in the demographic where your opinion on pop culture still matters.
Yeah, and he's got to talk to Woodcroft, though. I think it's really important that he talks to Woodcroft.
I know a lot of fans have tossed his name out because it's familiar, but I thought he really got out-coached, especially by Bruce Cassidy and Vegas a few years ago now, where he didn't have any other arrows in his quiver other than put McDavid and Draisaitl together. And it was just it just became at any moment of adversity, he would push that button, and it looked like other adjustments weren't there to be made. That was just my perception of him in that series, especially.
And what I would say is, so many coaches are better their second time around. He has experience coaching higher-end players. He's coached in the American League. He started as a video coach, for goodness sake. He's worked under two very, very good hockey coaches previously. And he has spent the entire year studying the game, studying people, asking questions about relationships, the modern player. General managers are going to want to talk to a guy like this. It's interesting. General managers will interview candidates just to see what they can learn, just to see what ideas they can gather. The running joke was Winnipeg knew they wanted Barry Trotz or Rick Bowness back in the day, but Kevin Cheveldayoff, the GM, met with Torts anyway, just as an opportunity to exchange ideas. Kyle Dubas will do a lot of that here. He'll cast a wide net, and he'll also use this to see what he can learn about what the industry thinks of his organization, of his program, and what insights he can gain from them. There'll be a little bit of that going on here too, Dan. I'm almost sure of it.
Francis, that is such a great point. I don't think a lot of us have considered that or even factor that into any part of this process. I'm going to let you go on that point because I don't think we can top it. I think we hit the high point. So let's just leave on a high note. And as this process unfolds, I want to have you back on, and maybe we'll talk about a couple of names that surface, whether I get to report them or somebody else beats me to the punch. And I want to tell you, though, how much I've appreciated your work this season, especially in the first half when you and I were kind of digging into Mike Sullivan's system tweaks and really dissecting the coach. I thought it brought a lot of light and even some color to to what was going on when a lot of people were getting really frustrated and sort of putting it all on Sullivan, not making changes, because that was a very popular narrative. I thought, I don't know if you and I single-handedly busted that up, but we certainly provided a life raft away from that that sinking narrative. So,
Well,
your brain's always, if you had gone the coaching route, I had no doubt you'd be one of the guys we'd be talking about.
Well, I appreciate that, and I love doing this with you because we just talk hockey, and then the audience chimes in and they decide how they feel. And that was my goal for today, to float some names out there that maybe folks haven't thought about, that I believe Kyle Dubas will minimally have an informal discussion with. And I just would like to end with this. I do think that yesterday, I was very impressed with Kyle Dubas at the podium. And I do love what he said about sometime, and I'm paraphrasing here, but a coach can be a great coach and not be a great fit for a certain situation any longer. And I think that's very well said. And I think that's what happened here. Mike Sullivan is a great coach. He's a hell of a coach. He'll forever be cheered when he walks in to PPG Paints Arena, as he should. But it was time. This happens. And now Mike Sullivan can decide if he wants to dive right back in and set a new bar for coaches' salaries, or take a little time off and plan for the Olympics, which I wouldn't rule out entirely. I would say not likely, but I wouldn't rule out entirely.
That's interesting too, because the paychecks keep coming anyway.
Well, they do. And one of your colleagues asked a question yesterday, and it was a very, very good, fair question. Did you fire him, or did you mutually agree to part ways? And everybody needs to understand, if they don't already, Mike Sullivan has to let Kyle Dubas fire him so he can get paid.
Yeah.
It's not a thing for coaches, especially from Sullivan's era, to, quote, walk away. So Kyle Dubas had to fly to Duxbury, Massachusetts, where Mike Sullivan lives, and let him go. It had to be done that way.
Yeah, the only coach I can think of who has walked away would be Paul Maurice in Winnipeg a few years ago. Just said, I can't reach these guys. I'm hurting. I'm not helping. I'll see you later. And it turns out it wasn't him.
And even then, we don't know what the settlement was or the buyout was. But Mike Sullivan, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, had 2 years left.
2 years left, yes.
$5-ish million?
5.5, yeah.
So Kyle had to let him go.
If Mike wants to invest in hockey media because he's so fond of the media, I should give him a call. Yeah.
I know you.
Sarcasm noted, hopefully.
You had your back and forth with him. I don't think it was as bad as you thought.
Oh, no. It was irritating to me because I felt like I was trying to help him. And that was what kind of rubbed me a little bit. It's like, dude, I'm trying to throw you, a softball here so you can talk up some positives instead of me coming in here every day asking you about the negatives. And to get a negative answer, I'm like, all right, that's where we stop.
It was time, and this will be a really, really interesting, I think, next 30 to 60 days. And my gut tells me it's going to be one of the names that we talked about here today.
All right. Francis, it is always a pleasure, my friend. And sooner or later, you are going to actually have a couple of pops in Pittsburgh when we're actually both in town at the same time.
I will look forward to it. Be well, and I'll look forward to maybe talking about the short list.
The short list.
At some point down the line.
Yeah, we got a whole month for that. Thank you, Francis. Have fun.
Thanks, Dan. Be well.
All right, that was Francis Anzalone. I saw a couple of comments like, what, Francis? Who's Francis? Is he an insider? Francis has coached internationally in the World Juniors, World Championships, USHL, NAHL, currently runs a hockey school where he has groomed several names that you very well know. Comes from a hockey family. Plugged in. His father was a great college coach, built Lake Superior State, Frank Anzalone, and Later had a couple of stints as the director of player personnel in Tampa Bay, and then in Calgary. So, Francis, if you have any questions about hockey, Francis is the guy that you want to ask. He's the guy that I'll text, hey, Francis, turn this game on. Tell me if you're seeing the same thing. And he'll either tell me I'm nuts or explain it in greater detail or so on and so forth. Francis is definitely an insider, and he has the coach's brain as well. Let's get to the questions now. We've done 50 minutes, good Lord, and I haven't even gotten to the questions yet. So wait, okay. So I've already linked to Big Joe and the articles I wrote that poor Big Joe never read. Let's go to Brandon. People are saying Carl is going to be picky about what team he eventually decides to go to, but how are the Penguins not front runners? Coached McGroarty, the World Juniors, and Bros in Denver to championships. Well, it's very simple. The Penguins are still in transition. And there is no way to know yet if the Penguins have hit rock bottom. I think that's the best way to say it. A coach is paid to win games, ultimately. And the Penguins don't figure to win a lot of games next year. So do you take it on the chin? No, you're going to go through hell trying to keep the team together, trying to keep morale and spirits up, with the expectation that Kyle Dubas does turn this around in 2 years. If Dubas makes one mistake, two mistakes, depending on the magnitude of those mistakes, now you're on the hook for 4 years before you've got a team that can win. That gets a coach fired. That's how a bad reputation starts. That's just not the situation that a first-time NHL head coach wants to go through. And then people blaming him, he wasted Crosby's last year or 2 years. I understand Penguins fans see the rosy view of the team, and there are positives, but don't overlook the risk of taking the Penguins' job too. Let's go to Flux. His top 5 coaching candidates in order: David Carl, Todd Nelson, the Hershey Bears coach. I've considered him. I've started looking into him. I don't know yet. Mitch Love, there we go. Sam Hallam, not familiar with him, and Jay Woodcroft. All right. I think you've got, obviously, Francis mentioned Mitch, David Carl. Yeah, well, I think I can't speak to Sam, but 4 of those 5 guys probably do get conversations with the Penguins. Let's see here. Y'all starting to talk amongst yourselves. Ryan Cunningham says, hey, Dan, Philip Hollander was a point per game person in the Swedish Elite League. Do I think his game will translate to the NHL? If so, what do I think his ceiling is? I don't know, Ryan. What I saw before he left for Sweden, he didn't have the skates for the NHL. That was just my very immediate and obvious analysis. I only got to see him for like 3 games, right? So I can't say I've got an extensive book on Hollander. He looked a little heavy-footed back then, or at least playing slow or tentative. Sometimes guys, flying down to Wilkes-Barre, they come to Pittsburgh and they're thinking, and they're at 50 miles an hour instead of 100. So I don't know. I would love to tell you that he, he's going to be a top 6 winger and score 30 goals next year. The simple truth is he's going to come to training camp. He's going to compete. And we'll see. To be honest, I don't even know. I did a deep dive through the Swedish Elite League this morning trying to find more information on Hollander. I couldn't even officially determine what position he was slotted in. I couldn't tell if he was playing center or a left wing, or actually even a right wing, because he's a left shot, and sometimes they do that over there with at least, more increasing frequency than here. I couldn't find lines. The highlights, their jerseys are a little funky, so I couldn't even tell who was Hollander. I was rolling through those. Believe me, I was trying. And a couple of things I found that could have told me were exclusively in Swedish, written in Swedish. So, and there was no translation because, it was like a YouTube video and stuff like that. I was a little befuddled by it all. Brian says no coach is benching EK or Chris Letang, period. That's probably right. I went through this on Twitter with a couple of people yesterday, and there won't be a coach who disciplines. Let's just keep it to Carlson, because Letang didn't really need to be disciplined last year. He was fighting. Chris Letang was fighting through a lot just to play. So let's focus on Carlson. Don't forget how contentious the Mike Sullivan, Phil Kessel thing back in 2019 became. It kind of ripped the team apart, and Sullivan didn't even bench Kessel. I mean, he sat him on the bench for a couple of third periods when they had the lead, and his explanation was basically, Phil, you don't play defense. I'm not putting you out there with a 1-goal lead. And that ripped the team apart. Not many coaches are going to run headlong into that buzzsaw of trying to bench a star player, especially one who's headstrong. That doesn't mean there aren't some, blue conversations behind closed doors, pointed fingers, raised voices, and anger, and so forth. But it does mean you generally don't embarrass your star player. Otherwise, you can fracture the room, lose that player as he checks out, and then you lose the team and basically lose your job. So you better be darn sure you're going to win this battle if you go that far. Could you Bill? Oh, Bill, go directly to jail. The funny thing is, when the Penguins were looking for a coach back in 2015, I strongly advocated for John Tortorella, and those high priests that I referenced in the Penguins blogosphere came from my head. Now they all like Torts. It's like, Torts would have been Torts probably could have won a Stanley Cup with that Penguins team, or blown it to smithereens. One of the two. Gary says it was absolutely time for a change. The complacency, the lack of urgency, the lack of accountability throughout the entire team during the season is reason enough to make the change. It was time. I think that's what Dubas basically said. He didn't use the word accountability. You added that, but it's not untrue when the same players kept making the same mistakes. Yeah, there had to be something. And I don't know that the Penguins got there. Let's go to Josh, checking in from Johnstown. So Francis Anzalone and the Anzalone family. Todd Nelson from Hershey would be the preferred option, in my opinion. Hershey has a great organization. Todd Nelson has been an AHL coach now, 2 years since Carberry got the bump up? I don't know if... I don't know. I guess is the broad answer on that, but I would expect him to get a conversation. Serious question, Brian asks. Is this an attractive job? You know what a car salesman says? There's a but for every seat. So... I mean, to some people, this would be an incredibly attractive job. To others, hell no. It is what it is. Kirk McDonald did a great job with the Baby Pens. He at least gets an interview. No, he won't. Tim, Dubas said that yesterday. I mean, bear in mind that Kirk McDonald's track record is a lot of ECHL work. Head coach of the Reading Royals, USHL. 1 year in the AHL, Dubas didn't feel like was enough to consider him. Kirk is not under consideration per Kyle Dubas, not per Dan Kingerski. Okay, let's see here. Jay, hello from Los Angeles. Over or under 30% chance that Avery Hayes gets an NHL stint next year? A 1 in 3 shot, huh? Or thereabouts. I'm going to take the over on that. I'm going to say, because of injuries or whatnot, that in fact Avery Hayes will get a cup of coffee next year in the NHL. I mean, he wasn't great in the playoffs, but he was still as good as anybody else. All right. Tocchet is going to Pittsburgh. Sully is going to the Rangers. Book it, says Robes 08. It's possible. I thought Tocchet would be a great fit for the Rangers, quite frankly. Let's see here. Mac Brunson. Do I think that the Dubas plan is a year further out? A year further out than what? Than it was? No. I think actually replacing Sullivan might be part of accelerating his plan. You know what? Let me go back to Mac here, because I talked about this on the Mike Sullivan video specifically. And I suppose it bears repeating once again. The number of decisions that Mike Sullivan made in order to win the next game or win that game compared to, or I should say maybe against, developing players. Drawing back Owen Pickering's ice time and his spot in the lineup so that it made sense to send him to the AHL. That was a big one that I circled. You know, it was January. They were still trying to win games. And on the surface, it all made sense, right? Okay, you're trying to win games. But then you look at the bigger picture, and two things as you wind it back were also very true. One, Ryan Graves was just the struggle bus this year. I mean, he felt like he added, was a little better. I would have disagreed with that. I thought actually his puck movement was achingly slow this year as he's still trying to think his way through the Penguin system, so on and so forth. Maybe if we do a video report card, I'll really dive in to why Ryan Graves was a terrible fit for Mike Sullivan. In fact, maybe a new coach coming in can resuscitate Ryan Graves with a different sort of breakout and defensive scheme. But I digress. At the time, I thought Owen Pickering should have been allowed to work through some of those struggles. I didn't think it was the right call to send him down, or I at least doubted the efficacy. I think I may have said, okay, well, it makes sense, and it did to the immediate goal of winning games, but it didn't make sense. If Dubas had decided that we're now about the future, sending Pickering down, way wrong move. Also, Vladislav Kolyachonok. I didn't see a whole lot when he played that demanded NHL ice time. It just really, but I also always put the caveat on my analysis of Kolyachonok. He'd only played like 100 games in the previous few years. He needed to play a lot of hockey. And once you get to that, 0 hour, no playoffs, it's not possible. I don't understand why Kolyachonok wasn't in the lineup, because we were left only with Mike Sullivan's impression of him or his judgment of him, not a visual representation resume that we can say, okay, Kolyachonok clearly doesn't have it. for that reason, he's a bit of a mystery. And those are maybe the two prime examples. I know some of you kind of were unhappy about Matt Nieto being in the lineup, or even Nola Chari. Nola Chari, you were wrong on. Matt Nieto, you had a point, because they really could have, in the second half of the season, put in a Sam Poulin or a Vasily Ponomarev and inserted one of those guys into the lineup and given them just a full 10-game run. Here's the deal, kid. You're in the lineup for the next 10 games. Go get them. Don't worry about making a mistake. Go get them. They didn't do that. They were still trying to win games. And I think that issue showed the clear delineation between where Dubas is heading. Talk about Mac, you talk about the Dubas plan. That showed the clear delineation between the Dubas plan and the Mike Sullivan daily grind. Dubas admitted it last June at the draft in Vegas that he understood he would make decisions that made Sullivan and the team unhappy. He said it at the outset. They knew it to be true, and he knew it to be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the head coach shouldn't do a little more to help the GM when it became obvious that the mission would change. Sullivan was still talking about winning games into April. Like, dude, it doesn't matter. It mattered for the team, it mattered for the psyche and all of that, but he could have tried to win games with players for the future. All right, I hope I probably added a whole lot to your question there, Mac. Let's see here. Johnny, how would Sid do with a younger, unproven head coach as opposed to an older, experienced head coach? Sid is a leader through and through. Now, he was upset with previous coach Mike Johnston, who was an older, experienced coach. Johnston had NHL experience. He had coached in the NHL at the LA Kings, and he had quite a bit of head coaching experience, mostly at the junior level. But Sid got very frustrated because he could feel that coach/system and team were completely at odds. He was, Mike Johnston, if you recall, kind of saved Marc-Andre Fleury's career with that 1-3 counterattack that he had going. He really defended or protected the goalie, but the Penguins were just miserable because they weren't scoring any goals. Perhaps some playoff success would have helped. When they got to the playoffs, they got run out of the building by the Rangers. So that's... I think Sid respects quality. Maybe that's the way I should phrase it. If Sid feels that the head coach isn't quality or is just, in left field with a lacrosse stick, then I think you might see a problem. That's when I think Sid says to Dubas, hey, no. I also think Sid will be looped in to the conversation to hire whomever. I'm not saying Sidney Crosby will have input or a say. I think he will be looped in and probably asked for his opinion anyway. All right. Dubas mentioned Lindy Ruff. Well, actually, JR, let me correct you on that. Dubas mentioned Lindy Ruff in context of Mike Sullivan on Monday, as Lindy Ruff was a type of coach who shepherded a team on, at the height, on the way down, and then on the way back up. That was Lindy Ruff in Buffalo. That's where he mentioned. Otherwise, Dubas thinks it's impossible for a coach to go through the high, the low, and back up to the high. Let's go to Connor Haberland. Did anyone else get irritated when Mark Madden asked Dubas about Crosby's reaction and his hesitancy towards change? Dubas looked pretty pissed off as well. I I think there was a misunderstanding there between Mark and Kyle. I think Mark felt, and I don't mean to speak, Mark doesn't need anyone to speak for Mark. That's for sure. But my interpretation of sitting there, I'm between the two guys actually where I was sitting. My belief on that situation was Mark thought Kyle was about to try to dodge it and shoo it away, and Mark was being proactive and trying to get an answer. That's old school journalism right there. So that's probably all I really have to. That's probably all I really have to say on the matter. It happened. You take it as you will. Matt says Sullivan's time was up. I would agree. What's that? Oh, that regular dude. We were getting the full boomer technological experience today. What do you mean? I'm using StreamYard, and anyway, I couldn't figure out how to get it done. There was no button. The button that split the screens disappeared. Like the program crashed, and then when I shared the screen, it came back, and so I got to press it. Let's see here. Patrick on Facebook, unless Dubas gets rid of some bad contracts as well as players, the Pens will miss the playoffs again. Well, I don't think that's even really a consideration. If they're in the playoff hunt, great. They want to win games, obviously, and they're going to chase it. But I don't think that's the goal next year. I think the goal next year is simply to begin to reestablish, put more bricks and mortar into the foundation. Let's see here. Flux likes Chris Lazary. All right. Mike Vellucci should get a look. He's a winner. I would agree with that, Brett. Brett Farverify. I mentioned Vellucci on X yesterday. I think Vellucci is a winner. I think he works really well with young guys. I didn't get the sense that he's going to get a look because Kyle Dubas specifically mentioned him as free to look around. And if he wants an audience with the guy they hire, he'll get one. Well, that almost necessarily means he won't be the guy they hire. Do me a favor while I'm looking through the questions here. Give me a like and a subscribe, or a like and a follow. Mr. Lang. Oh, okay. Let me get to some new names here and some questions. You guys, I'm looking at the cross chatter. I appreciate the cross chatter. I feel like Linda Richmond from Coffee Talk. Talk amongst yourselves. Getting verklempt. When Dubas took the job, says Robes, he was going to hire a GM. Yeah, he didn't. Fair enough. I know that he's grooming Jason Spezza. Could it be time to surprise everyone and hire a GM and take a step back? I don't think that's even under consideration. Let's go to Cliff Miller. Everybody needs to remember that the Penguins have a lot of pending free agents coming up. I will probably determine who is going to... That will probably... I assume a typo there, Cliff. That will probably determine who is going to be the next coach. I'm not sure I follow your thinking and your logic there. Matt likes Jay Woodcroft. You probably heard my question about Woodcroft. I would grill him before hiring him. No question about that. Kind of lost in the news, says Connor. Andy Chiodo potentially not coming back if the new coach wants a clean slate, as Dubas described. Chiodo has not impressed me, having coached a few goalie collapses. Well, you're looking at Jari, basically. And don't forget, the first goalie to really sing Andy Chiodo's praises was Spicy Broccoli. Louis Domingue, boy, it got like 30 or 40,000 views on our YouTube channel during the pandemic because Louis Domingue comes out, does his little media availability. I wanted to talk to him just because I was tired of writing about several other people, and he gave us two stories that day that he spoke outside the Penguins locker room there in Cranberry. The first one was about how low and how depressing it had been to be kicked around the previous season on the taxi squad, bouncing from here to there, never being with the guys, never practicing with the guys, but still kind of being on the roster. And he was actually traded twice, so he was on 3 different teams that year. And he talked about just, kind of how soul-crushing it was. But then he also talked about, and Andy Chiodo would have been brand new at the time, one conversation with Chiodo had him reinvigorated, refired, and just pumped up to play immediately. Chiodo is more of a mental goalie coach. I mean, by the time you get to that level, most of your fundamentals are, in fact, they're there, and he just has to hone them. He has to kind of, tweak and clean them up. Alex Nedeljkovic, certainly, Alex Nedeljkovic, I assumed was ticketed for Wilkes-Barre Scranton when the Penguins signed him. Nedeljkovic certainly had a rise under Chiodo. I would also point to Tristan Jarry's resurrection over the last 20 games of this season. If you're going to blame Chiodo for some collapses, you have to also give credit there. I don't know if the new head coach keeps Andy Chiodo. He could do a lot worse. He could definitely do a lot worse. The Power of Art says the Sullivan move was encouraged and directed by FSG. I'm a lifelong, I assume that's what you meant to type, a lifelong Liverpool fan and know how they operate. Wait a minute. So you're telling me that FSG wanted to fire a coach to whom they owe $11 million? Okay. Power of Art continues. Man, Art brings the big stick on this one. Kyle Dubas at the podium knows how to present himself as intelligent, but his track record as a GM is terrible. Go look at his trades in Toronto and see how many worked out for them. We've written about that. He made some clear mistakes when building the Toronto Maple Leafs. He never built a very good defense and never got that goalie to support. The back end. Dubas built from the front back rather than from the back out. And I, it's still kind of hampering Toronto, who has one series win this century, is it? Or one since 2003, whatever it is. I'm not deep into the history of that, but it's an issue that Dubas has struggled to put together blue lines. And several of Dubas's trades, I think, this year, I didn't understand. I knew the thinking, but I didn't understand why he would apply the thinking to the players that he did. Philip Tomasino, Tommy Novak, Timmins as well, and Connor Dewar. That giving up a 5th round for Dewar and Timmins, perhaps he was doing his buddy a favor so that Toronto could make other trades. By doing that, maybe Toronto owes the Penguins one. He didn't really do very well in the trades. Having said that, Ville Koivunen looks really good from the Jake Gensel trade, and Rutger McGroarty. Once it clicked for McGroarty, especially in the second half of the season, down in the AHL, and then how he looked in the NHL. Once that switch flipped, oh boy, McGroarty looked like what Dubas hoped he was getting. Let's see here. Hey, Dan, Quinn is the only coach, currently under contract, given that Dubas wants to give the next head coach a clean slate. What are the odds that he is kept as an assistant, reassigned, or let go? Well, I would say the odds are 100%, Matthew, that he is either kept as an assistant, reassigned, or let go. You gave me all three options there. I'm going to say it's 100%. It's one of those three. But you're asking what are the odds he's kept? I would say slim to none. Yeah, I think there's a better chance that Quinn goes with Sullivan to wherever. That he's not going to stay, and they're not going to reassign him to Wilkes-Barre. They're not going to kick Kirk McDonald out of a job unless Jason Spezza was in some way disappointed with McDonald. And I certainly didn't see any reason for that to be the case. Brett says a college AHL development kind of coach is warranted, but if you don't have a goalie, he doesn't have a chance. Well, that's with any coach. A bad goalie makes a lot of coaches look pretty stupid. That's for sure. Let's go to Kyle, the CFP. Can't wait to see what unfolds. Thanks for all you do, Dan. Your efforts and insights are the best among Penguins coverage. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I do try to bring a whole different element to what we do. Not just the medium, but the insights that I'm able to offer you. I've always wanted to learn the game of hockey from like a GM's perspective and a coach's perspective. And I clearly am not a coach or a GM at the NHL level, but I do think Pittsburgh Hockey Now is able to bring, more than your average reporter is going to bring to you. I kind of walk into the locker room and people do these feature stories. I don't care. I don't care if someone's dog is, really cute or, if they learn to ride a unicycle while growing handlebar mustache and eating pizza and chocolate milk every day through the summer. Doesn't really interest me. What does interest me is if they use a different curve on their stick and are able to get a top shelf shot while taking a pass, on the rush. I'm like, oh, okay. Now explain this to me. That's just where my mind goes. And there's room for all of us. I appreciate that you come here. Art, Dubas has made a lot more mistakes since he arrived. Jari, Graves, yes. Erik Karlsson. Erik Karlsson's gray area. The Jake trade, not a mistake. Not even, I wouldn't say that. Flux tells me that Philip Hollander's skating is markedly improved. It's now a strength of his game now. I'll take your word for it. I need to see some of this. If you can send me some highlights or where I can watch some of the games and do a scouting report, I'd be happy to do so. Just I couldn't find. I tried to watch a good 10-minute segment of Timra IK, and I couldn't tell who Hollander was. I'm like, I give up. Let's see here. John was sad that Sully went. Sam Hallam was Sweden's coach, LH informs me. Oh, he was Sweden's coach for the Four Nations? You can tell how closely I paid attention to the Sweden-Finland side of the Four Nations. Apparently there were rumors as Dubas liked him at the Four Nations. We'll see him again next week at the Worlds. All right. That would certainly seem to put him in the sort of conversation, wouldn't it? I'm a little, no pun intended, dubious about hiring a European coach from Sweden because of the larger rinks. If they played on the small rinks, I would say great. I'm a little hesitant to say a coach, from Europe who doesn't have experience on the small rinks would be the best. Maybe in the AHL, maybe as an assistant for a spell, but there's an adjustment. It's the same thinking, the same plays, the same instruction doesn't apply. It's just a different sort of game. Regular Dude says, how much is the Rangers draft decision dependent on the coach they hire? Probably none. I would assume. I mean, look, regular dude, the Rangers are going to hire somebody that they have a lot of optimism in. If they're not optimistic about their coach, they've made the wrong choice, right? So, yeah, I don't think a coach is going to affect the Rangers' decision whatsoever. Do I have any idea what's next for Mike Sullivan? Asks Jacob Eats. No, I don't. I mean, look, we're 48 hours post meeting here. Dubas and Sullivan met on Sunday in Boston. I'm sure Mike Sullivan is still digesting and processing. I'm sure he's probably spending time with the grandkids, a new grandbaby. And I'm sure in 1 minute, I need to coach again. And then he's, playing on the carpet with the kids or doing Lord knows whatever they do. And he's like, I could get used to doing this for a while. Maybe I need to decompress for some months. I don't know how you could possibly make that decision so quickly. I would bet dollars to donuts that Chris Drury has already called and said, hey, when you're ready to talk, let's talk. I'm sure that Chicago has already called or, sent an email to his agent or whatnot saying, hey, when he's ready to talk. And Sullivan is also probably watching Vancouver. His old buddies, Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. I'm sure Tocchet, if Tocchet is thinking about leaving, I'm sure Tocchet has apprised Mike Sullivan of the situation. Boy, we've done an hour and a half here. For what it's worth, unofficial Pens Twitter scout Jesse Marshall putting together some tape of Hollander in the coming days. There's that to look forward to. Yeah, I will definitely check that out. Gable Fisk. Have I ever looked at the numbers for Letang's buyout? It's not cost prohibitive at all. Gable, you can't buy out Chris Letang. He's a 35-plus contract, which means, sure, you can buy him out, but you don't get any savings. Zero savings. You are on the hook 100% for that money. I'm not quite sure where you saw the numbers, but yeah, you can't buy out a 35-plus contract. Now, what you can basically do is he retires, or you send him home or wherever. First of all, Letang would have to agree to any sort of movement for another year, but also, yeah, 100% counts on your salary cap. They do not want teams signing a 36-year-old to an 8-year contract and then 3 years in saying, oh, okay, and trying to get out of it. That was the whole point of the 35 plus there. That was kind of the Marian Hossa. Who else had a 12-year deal that was just ridiculous? Not Suter and Parise. Those guys were supposed to play in Minnesota for their entire careers. But there was another veteran who signed a long-term deal at like 38 years old just so a team could circumvent the cap. And I'm drawing a blank on, was it Chris Pronger? Was it Pronger or Niedermeyer might have been the tipping point on that. Shane says, off the wall question. I kind of like this, actually. How do I think the Pens back-to-back cup teams would compete in today's NHL? Well, I don't think we have to look too hard. Marc-Andre Fleury is still playing. Sidney Crosby is still playing. Evgeny Malkin is still playing. Chris Letang is still playing, so on and so forth. Phil Kessel at his peak, enjoying hockey, loving life with Nick Bonino and Carl Hagelin. I think that 2016 Penguins team especially, I think they could win the Stanley Cup again. No question. They could do it. Especially if we're going to rewind the years on Mike Sullivan. Don't forget how Mike Sullivan coached his butt off for that team as well, drawing up new breakouts on the whiteboard on the bench. when other teams tried to jump the wall and the Capitals tried to get a tactical advantage, Sullivan literally changed the breakouts in the middle of the game, and it worked beautifully. Let's see here. Dale Hunter would be a slam dunk, but likely only if his brother Mark were part of the package deal. No, Dale Hunter's not coming back to the NHL. He didn't fit as a head coach in the NHL. Don't forget, he lost the Capitals. In fact, going to the accountability issue we talked about before, Hunter benched Ovechkin. And it just was never a comfortable fit. Hunter is an intense guy. It's his way. It works in London. It does not work in the NHL. All right, I'm going to Staffe says Ricard Gronberg would be a great fit. What's my opinion on the Pens winning? I think it's a good idea. Are you screwing with me, Jacob? Are you screwing with me? Let's see here. Pierre LeBrun just announced Sully has 5 suitors asking to interview him. That makes sense. I'll have to end the chat and write that story here pretty quick. In fact, that was 20 minutes ago. Let me see here. There's some other names. Alexei Zhamnov in the KHL. I don't foresee a KHL coach coming here. Boy, tons of questions. No, Sid is probably not going to play at the Worlds. Let's see here. I heard Dan Bilesma's in town. Go to your room, no dinner. Do I think... Okay, we're going to end on this one. Do I think Erik Karlsson will be traded before next season? I think there's an 80-20 chance he is not traded. All right? 80-20 that he is not. All right, kids, that will do it. I think I've given you an hour and a half. I hope that's plenty of time. The first 40 minutes with Francis were much better than me blathering and banding about. Like, subscribe. Hey, click on a couple of those ads. Maybe even chip a couple bucks into the stars and say thank you, or the tip jar on Pittsburgh Hockey Now, because I'm not taking any days off. Not now, not this summer. I might take an afternoon off. We're not taking any days off, so there will be fresh content on PHN every freaking single day. All right, have fun, and don't do anything I wouldn't do. Or actually, do everything I wouldn't do. Later.